Welcome to Influential Entrepreneurs, bringing you interviews with elite business leaders and experts, sharing tips and strategies for elevating your business to the next level. Here's your host, Mike Saunders.
Well, hello and welcome to this episode of Influential Entrepreneurs. This is Mike Saunders with Marketing Huddle, and today we have with us Eric Fritzke, who is Broker Associate and Principal of the Trinity team at Keller Williams. Welcome to the program, Eric.
Good morning, Mike. Thank you, sir.
Hey, today I think it would be wonderful to get a little bit of, give us a 30,000-foot view of you and your team and what you specialize in as an introduction. And then let's get into, can you think of a specific case or project that you've worked on in the past? And let's talk through that, kind of like a living, breathing case study.
Sure. Okay, sounds good. So one that I've been working on, and we're almost to the goal line here, hopefully later this month, has been a development deal that we've actually been working on for about 2 years now, interestingly enough. And typically our development deals, we plan or figure on a year to a year and a half to get through the entitlement process before we actually, get to a closing table. And that starts off as a land, or like we like to call it, dirt listing. And we have a buyer come in, and then we go through the due diligence process with them.
It's interesting, you think of a real estate transaction and you think, 30 to 60 days. So 1 to 2 years before you even really hit the ground running, pun intended, with the dirt phase.
Right.
But
right.
Talk about the 1 to 2 years of entitlement process. What does that entail, and what should people expect if they're looking at entering into a commercial development deal?
Sure. So typically, if we have a client that's looking at a piece of ground for a development, before we even make an offer, we like to encourage them to set an appointment with, whether it's city or county. Typically, there's a planner there that you can sit down and just have a conversation with and say, here's what our thoughts are in terms of this property and what the project we would like to do here. And most of the time that starts out even before that meeting with us sitting down and looking at zoning and what does the city or county master plan hold for that piece of property, because it might be zoned, for instance, agricultural right now because it's historically been farmland. But as you know, as development and houses spread, those are the types of properties that get eaten up, right, for development, whether it be residential or commercial, that sort of thing. So usually we do a little preliminary before we set the time with that planner, but then we sit down with a planner and do what we call a concept or conceptual type of conversation of here's what we want the project to be. And the planner gives us some good feedback on, yes, I think that's something that the city and city council, sometimes there's a land use review committee that's involved as well. That's the type of project that they would support, or maybe not, or something in the middle where that's not quite what we think or had in mind or had planned for this property, but there's certainly a good chance or a possibility of getting something like that done or approved.
I want to go back to zoning, because I would suspect from the outside looking in, myself not being in the industry, there's probably some pitfalls and hurdles and things to keep in mind and consider when you're looking at zoning. So are there some common misconceptions that people have when they're dealing with that, and they assume, we can just do it this way, and in reality there's about 8 more steps?
Oh, that's a good question. I think some people, because of the historical use, again, kind of taking that farmland, for instance, if you've got a farmer who's been, parking his big like combines or tractors and those types of things on his property to do his farm work. Maybe he has an outbuilding, where he's storing some stuff or doing work on his tractors or vehicles inside, and so that would typically be considered a industrial type of use. Mm-hmm. But that very often may not be what, again, the long-term plan is for the area and that property in particular. So that might be an example where, the long-term plan is for, say, a residential development or a mixed use or a shopping center or whatever the case may be.
And I would suspect that when you do run into a hurdle, they can be overcome, but sometimes it's a little bit more intricate and involved than a residential deal, right? So What are some of the things to keep in mind time-wise or cost or how it impacts a project when you have to now stop the process and start going through another channel to get something handled?
So really, a residential transaction compared to what we're talking about specifically with a development is about as night and day as it can get.
Mm-hmm. I bet.
So, but usually the people that are in the development business, let's say, they're aware or expect certain processes and costs and fees along the way. So once we get past that kind of preliminary meet with the planner that we talked about a minute ago, usually next step is to negotiate a contract and get the property under contract. And then the developer or buyer, in this case, typically they're one and the same, that's when they start spending money. So usually
then they know the deal is viable.
Yeah, exactly. And that's usually why we try and do some of those due diligence things ahead of time in terms of checking the zoning, meeting with the planner, because we don't want to tie up the buyer developer's money and earnest money and any other costs that could be associated with the development until we actually get it under contract. So once we get it under contract, that's when they start ordering surveys, spending money with architecturals and engineers, starting to get, usually it's a little, at that stage it would be preliminary for any type of construction bids. But for instance, we had a project in Broomfield for a mini storage and retail development, and I think he was about 60, maybe 90 days into the deal, and I think he said he was somewhere between $50,000 and $75,000 into surveys and engineers and architecturals and those types of things.
And a lot of times people don't I would suspect it's kind of like measure twice, cut once. So that when you are obligating yourself for these services, they have to be paid no matter what happens. And if you didn't do some due diligence, you might have found a fly in the ointment and get out of the deal or don't proceed on, and you might have now obligated yourself. So I would venture to say that yourself, your team, your experience is able to afford clients some of this real world, learn from the trenches experience of, hey, let's do it this way because we've seen it go south before, so let's take this new angle.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and oftentimes, depending on the sophistication of the builder developer, we highly recommend that they hire a planning consultant. So that's really more of a specialty of someone who comes alongside that buyer, again, buyer developer, whatever the case may be, and helps them through the process. Goes to the city meetings, kind of quarterbacks the development process. So again, depending on who that buyer is and their sophistication, that's oftentimes and a lot of times they have their own developer planner type of person or consultant.
Yeah, like in-house, because they're doing projects like this. Yeah. Exactly. I suppose let's get back to your initial example or case that you were mentioning where you're finishing up a project that you've worked on coming up on 3 years. What are some of the highlights of that? What were, without mentioning names or projects or location, but what were some of the objectives that the client and the developer were looking to accomplish, and what were you guys able to deliver?
Yeah, so again, we expected most developments to be about a year and a half, and this one's pushing into 2 years now. Kind of one of the things that we knew up front that was going to be, I guess, an added layer to the typical process is this property in particular was essentially an island in the middle of, it was a county property. So in other words, it had not been annexed into the city, but it was surrounded by actually 2 different cities. So we have a property that's in the county, so we need to get county approval in addition to city approval and city utilities. If we were to try and annex into, say, a city, for instance, that would be a whole nother time frame and process that just would be cumbersome and wouldn't make a lot of sense. So that's been a bit of an interesting thing where typically you just have one municipality, either the city or the county, but not both to go and present to and ask for approvals and these types of things. So that one, like I said, has been interesting and a different, little bit of a different animal than we're used to even on a regular development.
It's interesting because probably both the city and the county in that specific area would welcome this project, but you still have to go through those steps and approvals and getting in front of whatever, city council or whatever the steps are. So is that what you found, which is, they're all for the project, but you got to go through the process?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yep. Because it really, whatever the project is, it probably brings some economic development to that area. And, depending on how big the project is, it may be something where they really would want initially, to have this project developer choose this area over another area. So have you found that through some of your experiences with these types of projects, you're able to advise the developer on just some ways to get through it a little bit more streamlined, or is it just, it is what it is?
Sometimes we're able to offer some expertise, but again, usually, if you've got a sophisticated developer, they've been there, done that. They oftentimes know the process even better than we do, and they have the team members on staff or in their corner, so to speak, in terms of the engineers and the architects and those type of people that have also been through the development process multiple times, and so they get the drill, so to speak, and they can help offer their expertise as well. But typically where we've been able to help and be of assistance, one of the ones that I mentioned earlier, not the one that's been taken 2 years, but one we closed toward the end of last year that took that one was, I think, 16 or 18 months. We were able to attend a couple of the neighborhood meetings, because that's part of the entitlement and development process is you have to. You guys have you've probably seen some of the posting notices that a property has where it talks about, meetings at this time or city council meetings on this date and this time. So typically you have to have at least 2 neighborhood meetings where you invite the surrounding neighbors to come in and, share their thoughts or concerns or hopefully in most developers want to hear positive feedback and reviews from the neighbors, right? So that city council then will be on board with it as well. But in those types of meetings, when we're present, and this one in particular, for example, with the mini storage development with the retail on the corner, what we were able to say, because this property in particular backed, I guess the neighborhood backed to this property, that a mini storage development would be much more advantageous or beneficial for these houses that back to this property, for this type of development to go in versus a typical retail type of center, which would be kind of the other type of use that would have been slated for the property. And that's because it's a much lower impact as far as the neighborhood is concerned. Less traffic, less noise, less issues with people being able to get behind the center. Because if the center, if a retail center would have been built, the neighborhood would have been looking into the back of the retail center, which aesthetically would have been less pleasing. So we were just able to be there and offer those types of viewpoints for the neighbors, when they were expressing some concerns about the development coming in. So
that's a good point. And there's a lot more moving pieces than sign this and execute that, and now let's proceed. I mean, I'm sure that there's cases in the past that a neighborhood really has thrown a wrench in the works. So being able to approach it from what's in it for them to please them really just helps to smooth that process out.
Absolutely.
Hey, so I'm sure that there's many people in the state of Colorado that do commercial and development type transactions. So what would some of the things be that separate yourself as a differentiator and a competitive advantage? Why should a developer choose your team?
Good question. I think that we're much more willing to walk alongside the developer, because oftentimes these types of projects, especially on the listing agent side, because we're representing the seller, we don't really have any fiduciary obligation to the buyer, right? But at the same time, if we're kind of walking alongside the developer, helping them through the process, attending the neighborhood meetings, those types of things, those are a benefit to our seller because it helps the project go through and go smoothly and those types of things. So, we're willing to take our time to spend more time than maybe the typical agent might be willing to do on those types of projects, just to help them get through the process.
Yeah, that's a big piece that you mentioned in any business, which is the personal touch and personal relationship that comes with any kind of a transaction. So with as many moving pieces that we've just touched on here, I think that's a really big differentiator. So what's the best way that people can reach out and connect with yourself and your team, maybe to even discuss a commercial development project in even pre-planning phases?
Sure. So my direct line, you're looking for a phone number, Mike?
Whatever you would like to provide, phone number, email address, website.
Sure. So I'll do all three. My direct line phone number here at the office is 303-539-7661. You might end up speaking with my partner, Gordon. He's on the commercial side with me as well, and our assistant, Hope, is also always typically available. Website, Trinity Team, realestateco.com. And let's see, what else did you mention? Oh, email address. And actually, we're just switching over, and I'm getting a new one, which is going to be eric@trinityteamre.com.
Very simple. So we'll make sure to post this in the show notes so that people can click directly there. But I encourage people to reach out, and if you're thinking of a commercial development project, there's many planning aspects to keep in mind before you even launch. So Eric and his team will be able to give some good advice in your planning phase. So Eric, thank you for taking time on the show here to give us a good conversation and some tips and strategies.
Absolutely. My pleasure. Always good catching up and speaking with you, Mike.
Thank you.
You've been listening to Influential Entrepreneurs with Mike Saunders. To learn more about the resources mentioned on today's show or listen to past episodes, visit www.influentialentrepreneurssradio.com.